Welcome to a new episode of English Plus Podcast. This is Grammar Advanced, and today we will talk about past simple and present perfect. When we use the past simple and present perfect, especially when we compare them to each other. Now, of course, this is Grammar Advanced, so we're not going to talk about the simple uses or the basic uses of the past simple and the present perfect, but we will talk about the nuances we find when using the past simple and the present perfect. Now, before we start, let me remind you that you can find the transcript of this episode in a link I will leave in the description. And then there's also the link that will take you to Patreon, where you can become a patron of this show and support English Plus Podcast. And then you will get a PDF practice worksheet custom made for every single episode we release. Now, with that being said, let's start right away with the very first point I would like to talk about when we want to compare the use of the past simple and the present perfect. Now, when we use time expressions that refer to the present, such as this morning, this week, this month, and today, we can use either the past simple or the present perfect. But here, we have to consider how we think about this morning. Now, if we think about this morning as past or completed time period, then we use the past simple. But if we think about this morning as a time period which includes the present moment, so this morning is not over yet, then we use the present perfect. Let's take a look at two examples and we will understand better how we can differentiate between using the past simple and the present perfect with these expressions, as we said, this morning, this week, this month, or today. For example, I can say, I didn't shave this morning, and I can also say, I haven't shaved this morning. Both are fine, but the focus and the meanings are slightly different. So when I say, I didn't shave this morning, that means, or what I mean by that the morning is over and I didn't shave. But when I say I haven't shaved this morning, what I'm saying is it is still morning and I might shave later. So you see, grammatically, of course, you can use both of them. It's not about right and wrong. And this is something that you will find frequently talked about in Grammar Advanced. It's not just about right and wrong. Maybe we do that in the elementary and the intermediate levels, but in advanced levels, we don't only talk about right and wrong, we talk about the difference in meaning. Because as I said, I didn't shave or I haven't shaved this morning, both are correct, but the meaning is slightly different. If I say I didn't shave this morning, it's over. I don't have a chance to shave anymore, at least not this morning. But I haven't shaved this morning, it's still possible that I might shave later. So that was the first point I wanted to talk about. Now let's move on to talk about the next point. Now we will talk about time clauses with since. Now, in a sentence which includes a time clause with since, we generally prefer a past simple verb in the time clause and the present perfect verb in the main clause. The time clause refers to a particular point in the past. That's why we use since. Now, for example, let's take an example to know exactly what I mean by this. Now we say, for example, since Mr. Dodson became president, unemployment has increased. Now, since Mr. Dodson became president, that's a specific point, a particular point in the past. So obviously, the best tense to use is the past simple. And we're talking about unemployment has increased. Now, here we use the present perfect for that because I'm talking about what has happened since that point until now, and it's still happening. So here, when the point is specific like that in the past, we usually use the past simple with since, and the present perfect in the main clause. Let's take a look at another example. She hasn't been able to play tennis since she broke her arm. Since she broke her arm, that is a particular point in the past. She broke her arm last week, last year, it doesn't matter, but it is a particular point in the past. And that's why we use the past simple, or we prefer to use the past simple. And she hasn't been able to play because since that point in time in the past until now, and maybe in the future, or it might change, but we don't worry about that. Since that point until now, she hasn't been able to play tennis. And that's why we use the present perfect with this main clause. But note that this is not always the case. We can still use the present perfect in the time clause that contains since if the two situations we describe in the main clause and the time clause extend until the present. So sometimes it is obvious, it is clear that since we're talking about a specific or a particular point in the past, and then we use the past simple and we're fine. But sometimes both points in the main clause and in the since clause or in the time clause, obviously, extend to the present. Let's take a look at this example to understand it better. have you met any of your neighbors since you've lived here? So here we're talking about the main clause that said, have you met any of your neighbors? And that's fine. The main clause, we usually use present perfect. But let's take a look at since. Let's take a look at the time clause. Since you've lived here, you have lived here. Because here, you have lived here, it's still going on. You still live here. So we can use the present perfect even with since if we have the meaning to convey that the thing extends to the present, that this action extends to the present. You've lived here, of course. You started living here sometime in the past, and obviously you still live here. So it is not natural to use you lived here. Because you lived here, what does that mean? You don't live here anymore? It's kind of confusing. But if we want to use the past simple in this sentence, for example, we can change live and use move. Now, move, yes, it's a particular time in the past. We can say, have you met any of your neighbors since you moved here? Because moving, that's something that happened in the past, it's over. But live is not. So in this case, we can use both the main clause and the time clause with since in the present perfect. So that was our second point. Now let's move on to talk about another point, and that is when we use time clauses introduced by after, when, until, as soon as, once, by the time, and time expressions like the minute, the second, or the moment. Now here, when we use these time clauses, we said after, when, until, as soon as, once, by the time, or the minute, the second, the moment, we can use both the past simple and the present perfect. But the meaning is completely different. When we use the past simple, obviously we refer to the past. That's not a surprise. But remember that when you want to use these expressions to refer to future events, you can't use the past simple. You can use the present perfect if you want. Let's take a look at these examples and understand this even better. Now, if we say after she left hospital, she had a long holiday. After she left, we use the past simple here. We're talking about the past. She left hospital in the past. She had a long holiday. That's past. But we can say after Lucas has left school, he will be spending 6 months in India. So here, when I say after Lucas has left, we use the present perfect. So the meaning here we're talking about is in the future. He will be spending 6 months in India. But even if you don't have the continuation of the sentence, you still understand after Lucas has left school, I'm not talking about the past. I'm talking about the future. Now let's take a look at another example. And this time I will use the minute because I told you we have also the time expressions, the minute, the second, or the moment, which are kind of the same in this case. The minute I got the news about Anna, I called my parents. The minute I got the news, that's past simple, so we're definitely talking about the past. I'll contact you the minute I've got my exam results. So the question here, did you get your exam results? No. Have you gotten them yet? No. That's why I'm telling you, I'll contact you the minute I've got my exam results. And that's why I've got here refers to the future. So as you can see, here we're not talking about right and wrong. We're just saying that both are fine. So if you think about grammar mechanically, you won't get far. And to be honest, you won't be able to create those sophisticated sentences and use them in your own writing or speaking. Here, we're not talking about right and wrong as much as we're talking about what does this mean and what does that mean. And we think about grammar as tools we use to express the meanings we have, not the other way around. So, with that being said, I'll have to tell you that in the time clauses in sentences like this, it is possible to use the past perfect instead of the past simple, and it is possible to use the present simple instead of the present perfect. So with these time expressions, if we want to talk about the past, we can use the past perfect instead of the past simple. Both are fine with the same meaning. And we can use the present simple instead of the present perfect, and both have the same meaning. Now, of course, the past perfect and the present perfect, they kind of focus on the completion of the act, but this is something we will focus on in a later lesson. But now, as I said, we can use the past perfect instead of the past simple and the present simple instead of the present perfect. So let's take a look at this example we just had earlier. After she left hospital, we used here the past simple, and we said here we're talking about the past. Then we said after Lucas has left school, and here we said we're referring to the future. But of course, we can say after she had left hospital, she had a long holiday, and that is the past perfect, of course, and that's completely fine. And also we can say after Lucas leaves school, present simple instead of present perfect, and it's also correct. And here, after Lucas leaves school, he will be spending 6 months in India. So with that being said, let's move on to talk about the next point, and that is when we use the present perfect and the past simple in news reports. Now, there is nothing like there's a rule or something that governs news reports and they should use this tense or that tense. Of course, they can use all tenses based on what they're trying to say, but usually in news reports, you will read about or hear recent events introduced with a present perfect, and then the past simple or other past tenses are used to give details. Well, that's a common way news people do it. They introduce the topic or they introduce what they're trying to say with present perfect, and then they continue with details in the past, mostly past simple, but other past tenses are possible as well. So let's take a look at this example. A Russian spacecraft has returned safely to Earth with its 2 passengers. So here, as an introduction to what I'm trying to say in this news report, I said has returned. Well, obviously it returned. It's past. But because it's the introduction, I can use the present perfect in this context, of course. And then I will move to some details and say US astronaut Scott Keen and Russian cosmonaut Olga Kalyuri landed in the early hours of Wednesday. Now here, details, that's past. And that's the usual way to use it in news reports. Let's take a look at another example. An American woman has become the first person to make 2 million contributions to Wikipedia. So has become here, I introduced the topic, or I introduced the report actually. And then I will go to details. Esther Miller began editing the site 8 years ago. I'm talking about details. I use the past to talk about details, and that's the usual way. So that was about news reports and how we use the present perfect or the past simple in news reports. And now let's move on to talk about the last point we have for today, and that is after some patterns. And this pattern is after it, this or that is or will be the first time. This expression, we generally use the present perfect after these expressions. We say it is the first time, or it will be the first time, or this is the first time, or that will be the first time, etc. After this expression, we usually use the present perfect in the next clause. So let's take a look at these examples so you understand better what we're talking about here. For example, we say, that's the first time I've seen Jan look embarrassed. That's the first time I've seen her look embarrassed. Or we can say, it won't be the first time she has voted against the government. It won't be the first time she has voted. So after these expressions, we usually use the present perfect. But of course, pay attention that after the same expression, when we use was, we usually use the past perfect. So if you say it was the first time or this was the first time, don't use the present perfect, of course. We usually use the past perfect. Like when we say, it was the first time I'd talked to Dimitra outside the office. I had talked to Dimitra outside the office. Now, with that being said, we talked about the special uses or those nuances that are related with the past simple and the present perfect. I hope you found the information I shared with you about the past simple and the present perfect useful. I hope you learned new things. Don't forget that you can find the transcript of this episode in a link I will leave in the description, and you can also get the PDF practice worksheet for this episode and for every single episode if you decide to become a patron of this show and support us on Patreon. I will leave a link to that as well in the description. With that being said, this is your host, Danny. Thank you very much for listening to another episode from English Plus Podcast. I will see you next time.